blue sheets already out? Raise your hand if you got a blue sheet. See, I don't need a mic. Blue sheets, who's got them? I got one there, two. Please keep passing. And you all can have your individual roll. It's the right thing. Yeah. Oh, goodness. Hard crowd.
They're all chewing. They can't.
They're all chewing. Is that it?
Maybe that's just me. Maybe. I know, right? Little finger sandwiches and yeah. I want to
I can arrange a high tea for you. Did Alvaro need something from us?
Yes, but we're good. I can brief you afterwards. No big deal. Okay, so we actually are starting. We have a note well. This is the last time you have to note it well this week. I mean, unless you want to go back to the privacy of your own hotel room and note it well some more, that's up to you. But as usual, we have IPR rules, and your lawyer really wants you to know what they are, even if you don't find that kind of thing interesting. Today is not Thursday, so we're skipping over these. We have a not quite as crowded, but almost, the traditional full agenda. So we'll, as usual, be trying to move right along. We have our pretty picture of Bangkok. Sue will see you at IETF 103. I will not be able to make it. Did you want to give these?
Okay, John's handing me these because I wrote them. I tried to put pretty pictures in. It's the last day. You want to see pretty pictures, right? So thank you for your patience. Your working group chairs tried to plan out the last year and a half, but we had perfect storms of personal things. So please, we're trying to still catch up. If we've dropped your draft, if there's someone, Rajiv called me last night and reminded me of something. I've got a spreadsheet, but maybe something fell off. Please come talk to us. Please tell us, send us emails, send it directly to us. We're still trying to catch up and, beat us over the head. We're happy to have that happen, although maybe. So this was a little comic side. We have two drafts. Alvaro, is draft ITR prefix SID considered to be at the RC editor or still in process?
I thought that's, already with the RC editor. I thought it was ready. I don't know. I have to take a look at my list.
Soon, Alvaro was saying, he just, in my mind, got it. We have these following drafts passed working group last call and to implementation, which means our review team, chairs, are working hard. I may tag some of you, and John may tag some of you for a targeted review. So if you get a question from the chair saying, would you please review this document, and it's outside of a routing directorate, we are sometimes trying to help our speed up process by asking targeted reviews. Good.
Speaking of asking for volunteers, we periodically sort of gently suggest that if you want to volunteer as a document shepherd, that would be great. We usually have to, then push people away because we get so many volunteers. I wish I were serious. But I will just repeat that if you should like to volunteer as a document shepherd, it's a very, very valuable function. Your working group will thank you. The documents will move forward faster. Your chairs will thank you. And it's a really good way to see how the sausage gets made.
So what I wanted your patience of is when you get through working group last call, there's lots of things to get through before you finish the RFC. If we're ahead, we sometimes send these ahead, like routing directorate review, Obster review, sometimes for security review, then other shepherd comments. So please be patient with us as we get through that race. We're racing with you. We're your sport team. Okay, we do need 2 implementations for these. The draft IDR TPE is one I want to highlight. If you know of implementations, tell me. Please, John and I are following the rules. These are upcoming working group call. John has an IPR call for flow spec interface set. The BGP model I mentioned yesterday, I believe, CARE, did we get through all the cleanups on that? Okay, so that will go for working group last call probably sometime this evening when I touch down at some flight. Okay, special mentions. We had the open leak, the route leak open policy. I need to see a hand. We have had several positive extended message calls, just as a help to the chair. How many people are still interested to go another round on working group last call? Could we have a hum? So was that a medium hum? How many people? How many people don't want to see extended messages go to working group last call again? Hum, please. I'm hearing silence. Okay, we will go another round. There's a flow spec draft, BGPLS, BGP star for segment routing, and operator drafts. Now, do we need to process for the operators? John and I would like feedback if there's anything that we need to fast track. Okay, I think I've gone through the rest. You can read it in your mail. Joe, Alex, it's your turn.
Alexander Azimov, QRT Labs. I'm glad to see all of you in this room, in this big room this afternoon.
Alex,
Right.
they can't hear a thing you're saying.
Uh,
We can adjust the mic. Maybe.
Is it better? Nice, nice. So, one more time, Alexander Azimov, QRT Labs. And today I'd like to talk with you about a local preference. And things are changing recently. So originally, local preference was a representation of local policy. But we are getting new functions, new default policies, and it is affecting the way local preference is processed. So we may have a default policy that is applied when the route is received. After that, we will have a route map that will change results of this default policy. And after that, we will have another default policy that will provide us a result. So for me, it seems that such chain of changes where parties are totally ignoring each other can provide some kind of unpredictable results with ongoing debugging issues. And of course, the problem is that we need default policies. We need to apply some of them in code to guarantee that there are no fat fingers and so on, so on, so on. But maybe we should avoid applying default policies after route maps because it makes the situation really unclear. And instead of encoding different types of routes inside single non-transit attribute, which had different purpose at the moment, at the beginning, maybe we should do it in another way. So there is no draft. It's just an idea that I want to share with you, and maybe there is no problem, and you will tell me about it. So what is on top of BGP decision process? We will add something like a route type. And with next comparison, this route type will be also used as in the default policies, and currently it will solve all situations when we need to override local preference after route maps. Maybe it's not a problem at all. So we are happy that gradual shutdown and other, for example, leak detection default policies will override all what can be done in route maps. Maybe you're not happy about it. So please go to the mic and share your ideas. Thank you.
Rüdiger Volk, Deutsche Telekom. Actually, my view is I do not like the idea that the router implementation outside of the explicit policy configuration that I do mucks around with attributes. And I'm not aware that any recent thing really asks for that. I think the proposals that are around so far are essentially saying, well, okay, if you see that signaling, you should apply certain policy, like setting local pref to 0. But as far as I understand, the assumption is that that's actually done in locally configured policy, and I would not like to see that any implied manipulation of attributes is done anywhere. It may be an interesting thing to consider asking vendors to provide kind of simple calls to standard policies that can be called up, but for stuff like you have there, well, okay, in my environment, I would, if I have different things for setting local pref 0, I probably would be setting also some internally defined community that tells me exactly the context. Kind of, yes, I can see pointing something like back to Igna's story about the take up of young models, applying his kind of 2080 rule. There certainly is a majority of networks out there that is not used to do more sophisticated policy like I think has to be done, and that has to be considered, but I think that should be addressed by something like providing those guys with calls to a standard policy library rather than forcing everybody to rely on their vendors to do exactly the right thing. Let me just remark, I have seen no export not being recognized by vendor software in certain corner cases.
Okay, 2 notes. First one, Rudiger, I can't say that I totally agree that there should be no enforcement in the code, because otherwise, okay, I'm pretty sure that Deutsche Telekom will be capable of doing whatever they want with the communities, with signals and so on. I'm pretty sure about entity too. I'm not pretty sure about the other 50,000 ISPs. Another note is that I've just checked one of the open source software, which is FRR. And in this software, the local policy is already overwritten. So if the gradual shutdown is received, the local pref will be changed, ignoring anything that is in route maps.
John Scudder. Yeah, a few comments. One is that I think the first time I was trying to remember, and I didn't quite have the stomach to go back and look in minutes from the 1990s, but the first time I remember this coming up was like, you know, at an IDR, maybe it was still called BGP working group back then, in, you know, like IETF 20 something. And I think we still have exactly the same, I think you're talking about exactly the same issue as we were talking about then, which is that having a whole bunch of different criteria and trying to map all of those into a single unit 32 you lose a bunch of context and you potentially overwrite one another. And I think Rudiger just expressed the view that prevailed then, which was if you have a complicated set of criteria, great, we have a complicated policy language, you can stick it all into the policy language algebra, and no matter what, you still have to pop out a conclusion. I will add one more thing, which is that there was at least one attempt to solve this, and it's a working group document, which is BGP custom decision, that I think is potentially applicable in that it basically gives you a structured way to add a whole bunch of different preferences into the decision process. You know, speaking obviously as a working group member, which is why I'm down here on the floor, I think this is, you know, it's whether we decide to do something to fix it or whether we don't, I don't think it's a non-problem. I kind of agree with your point of view that if you're a very sophisticated network operator, yeah, it's probably not a problem. But if you aren't, you may need a little more help than what we give you right now. So, you know, there's, as you said, there's no draft, but it seems like I would like to encourage people here to engage on it because, you know, it's not going to go away. It hasn't gone away in the last 2 decades.
Okay, thank you for comment.
Alvaro Retana, Huawei Technologies, speaking for myself. Just wanted to echo what John just said. I think that, yeah, the custom community draft, I think, addresses some of this, where it would let you add extra indicators into the selection process that would tell you invalid backup, you know, other things around that. The draft is expired. It's not on your list because I haven't had the time to go rev it again, but I will, just so that it's there, just in case. There are a couple of implementations, but that's another topic that we need to discuss at some point. Thanks.
Yeah, but I would like to repeat that my main concern that on one hand, we need default policies. I do believe that we really need them. Rudiger may not need them, but the community may need them really much. At the same time, the default policies that are overriding route maps gives me very uneasy feelings.
Again, I think that a concept like providing a library of standard prepared policies to be called up would be a really good thing for helping those who are not able or do not want to do complicated policies all themselves. And well, okay, if I had such a library, even I might call on it in certain cases, but really understanding exactly what happens and having the choice myself.
Here, why don't you sit there and use that?
When was the last time you've seen AS1 or AS2 in the wild due to the fact that it was just copied from some kind of example? So you have a operational experience that people that are given an example are copying it without understanding what they are doing. And instead of better protection, we will have templates that will go in the wild that are not really working.
So by the way, so we'll take Jeff's comment.
Of course, it may be so.
We'll take Jeff's comment, but then I want to cut discussion on this. I think it's worth continuing discussion, but you know, it's afternoon now, so the bars will be open after the meeting ends.
Jeff has, so we're running into really two different things here. Is like one of the things we're running into is that the number space, despite the fact that it's gigantic, has gotten a little bit crowded because of a lot of defaults that we had from very early in the days. Um, and this actually caused issues as far back as like the MIB stuff. The second place that this is a little bit messy is that what we're generally describing is that we have this nice procedure inside of our RFCs to say, here's the tie-breaking process. It's well understood. People know where things go. We don't really have something that is very similar in terms of run policy here, and other protocol extensions are going to have influence that's going to have impact. So we talked about, for example, graceful shutdown, wanting to twiddle with the local pref as an example. We have cases for the route validation, wanting to do things. We have cases we're talking about here that have similar impact. And what might be a useful document to write, and will probably be the reason for us to tear our hair out for the next decade, is simply write down some sort of abstraction of the PIB, as it used to be called back in the day, and where the interaction points are. And simply enumerating that, even if people don't actually implement the darn thing, means we're at least talking about the same thing.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Alex, for getting that conversation going. I hope it's not the end of the conversation.
Hello everyone, my name is Dhanendra Jain. I work at Cisco. I'll be presenting updates on advertising segment routing policies in BGP on behalf of authors and contributors listed here. So the last update was presented in IETF 98, and since then there have been a few revisions. We added a number of things in these revisions. So would like to collect feedback and comments from the work group about the updates. So just a quick recap on the BGP segment routing policies. This draft really defines method to signal segment routing policies via BGP protocol. BGP happens to be signaling a candidate path of the SR policies. There are other methods to program the candidate paths for the policies such as PSAP and locally configured method. To signal segment routing policies via BGP, we define a new SAFI in this document, SR policy SAFI with code 73. And as can be seen on the right side in the box, the details about the policy are encoded. Identification of the policy is encoded in the SR policy NLRI, which is basically color and endpoint and distinguisher. And the segment routing policy, explicit paths and segment list and other attributes of the policy such as binding set, preference, etc. are encoded in the tunnel encapsulation attribute. A new TLV is defined in tunnel encapsulation attribute to carry this information. This also defines an extension to color extended community to achieve automatic steering of BGP routes onto the SR policies in the forwarding. So in last few revisions, there have been some updates, and here is a summary of updates. So first thing we added is segment types 9, 10, and 11 to cover the SRv6 segments. This is to align with the SR policy architecture described in the SR policy architecture draft and Spring Working Group. We also corrected the SIT type 3 and 8 definitions to align it with the definitions mentioned, information model of the segments mentioned in the SR policy architecture. Added few new sub-TLVs under the tunnel type SR policy to define symbolic name to assist in debugging and troubleshooting. And this is also available in other methods of signaling the candidate path. Added SR policy priority sub-TLV. This is to provide, to attach a priority to segment routing policies signaled by BGP. And this assists in defining priority order in which the policy should be converged upon the topological changes. And then we added explicit null label policy sub TLV. This helps in head-end in figuring out whether an explicit null label should be pushed or not when overlay routes. Okay, sure, thank you. In segment type definitions from 3 to 8, we added a field to add SR flex algorithm specification, so that on the head end, a prefix can be resolved to a specific SID based on the SR flex algorithm. We added a couple of new flags in segment type sub TLV. First is V flag. This is to enable the verification of SID supplied by the controller. This is to take care of the situation when controller supplied a SID, but head-end also is resolving a SID based on the TEDV available to it, and operator would like head-end to verify whether the SID supplied by the controller matches with the head-end calculation or not. More details on this is available in suitable section in SR policy architecture draft. So I would recommend you to take a look at it. We added A flag to enable the SR algorithm bit that was mentioned shortly before. Then in binding SID, 2 new flags are added, S flag and I flag. S flag is to enforce the behavior of a specified binding SID only. That means if the binding SID is supplied by the controller and head-end cannot really allocate it, it should not try to locally allocate a dynamic binding SID. I flag is to enforce a drop upon invalid behavior. Certain services want SR policy to remain inactive. Want SR policy to remain active even when certain constraints cannot be met and the path becomes invalid. There are use cases for that, and they are again mentioned in the SR policy architecture consideration draft. Few other updates. So next hop address length specification is being tidied up. Earlier it did not take care of IPv4 and IPv6 next hops in either SAFI. There were some restrictions. Defaults for policy preference and weight parameters have been corrected. Now we align with SR policy architecture draft with respect to the defaults. And then there have been several updates in various sections to align the section references and terminology with segment routing policy architecture draft. The segment routing policy architecture draft has been recently work group adopted, and the content have been reworked or arranged between the architecture base draft and the policy consideration draft. So the BGP draft, which allows signaling of SR policies, needed to tidy up the references and the terminology to align it better. We also made some changes across various sections for error handling. Typical error handling when the tunnel encapsulation attribute sub TLVs go through or see some situations like malformed sub TLVs or duplicates sub TLVs, etc. And then editorial corrections throughout the document. So as next steps, we would like to address any comments, and we would make request for IANA code points for newly defined sub TLVs and flags. And then we think it's getting ready for workgroup last call because it's fairly mature. But based on the feedbacks coming from architecture draft and after the adoption of architecture draft, whatever changes may be required in BGP draft, we would accordingly make changes.
Hi, Andrew Stone, Nokia. This is not a comment on this draft specifically, but in the wider scope of things, is there any plans on advertising the acceptable range for binding SID that can be used for the head end?
Advertising the binding SID range?
Yes, so for example, if you have a controller that wants to push down a binding SID, well, what label range should that controller use, for example, dedicated specifically for this purpose?
So a given SR policy candidate path can use only one binding SID, but we have plans to add deriving the binding SID from SRLB, and that is in the plan.
Drifting zero. So it would be very useful for people who read it to provide a way to understand how feedback loop works. Because machinery is scattered across different drafts, so some of them are the TLSP distribution. There's some other stuff that provides information about whether resources have been allocated, whether there's been any errors. So having references where you define how you do it would be very useful from structure perspective.
Sure, thank you.
One thing to add to your to-do list before working group last call is to fill in the security considerations on this particular draft. I'd really like to see that before we do working group adoption, because there will be, policy is always one of those things. Please put in the security.
Sure, thank you.
Yes, Honorable Zafar Nokia. I have a general comment is regarding signaling SR policy through BGP is great, but the consequence has some issues that we don't have it in PSAP, for instance. One is that there is no feedback that the SR policy was actually installed. So I know there's another draft addressing that BGPLS through BGPLS. But the other one is that if a controller is appearing with route reflector, there is no way for controller to know that actually these routers can support this. So how controller knows that you can send this our policy to these routers?
So controller, so for the first question, yes, there is feedback mechanism through different mechanism, which is via reporting via BGP-LS, and I think there is update on that. The second is controller will be sending to RR if it is peering over this SAFI, and then RR is peering with
but controller should, because when the binding state, for instance, is very good to support a binding state. Controller wants to install this SR policy in the network.
So, excuse me, just for, in interest of time, I don't think we have time to have sort of a complicated architectural kind of philosophical discussion.
No, that's
right
what I think
now.
is missing in this draft. It should be a way for the routers to advertise capabilities through the same mechanism. Router can use the same AFI-SAFI to advertise some default color or something that when controller gets that knows that this router actually can accept the SR policy.
Okay, so then Andrea, if you want to answer that, go ahead. But generally my comment here is it sounds like you have a specific proposal. Send text. It's a working group document. It's it's your document as well as his. If you have a proposal for how to change it, send text to the list.
Okay, sure.
Sure, I'll discuss with you after the slot.
Ketan Talaulikar, Cisco. Just to answer that question, the fact that the router supports this capability and it pairs with the RR, I'm just asking whether that's not sufficient indication of the capability.
Okay. If you guys want to keep having this conversation, you can keep having it, but we keep eating into Dhanendra's next time. So up to you. I think we'll cut it after KR anyway.
KR Patel, Arcus. I just wanted to say that, I'd given the same comments to you offline, and I think it'd be nice to have a section here that describes route reflector in forwarding path versus a route reflector off forwarding path. And what are they supposed to do? Assuming the peering connection goes through the route reflector to the client versus controller connecting it directly to everyone.
Sure. Thank you.
If you do TKers, we also, through the route reflector, we also include in case there are a group of route reflectors. Thank you.
Sure. So this is an update on BGP segment routing Young model. I'm presenting this on behalf of co-authors. So BGP segment routing YANG data model can be used to configure and manage the SR extensions in BGP. 00 version was submitted few weeks before IETF 102. What it covers right now is prefixed extensions, egress peer engineering extensions, BGP signal SR policies extensions in the context of BGP, automatic steering related extensions, and SRv6 VPN extensions. And for each of these technologies, the corresponding references are mentioned here. And this model will be evolved to cover more and more SR extensions as in subsequent revisions. So this really augments base BGP model defined in IDR BGP model in suitable containers and address families. It complies with NMDA architecture. We import a lot of common data types from routing common YANG data type, RFC. And it is also expected to import and augment SR specific data types from either base SR YANG model, or in case of SR policies, base SR policy model, and SRv6 YANG model. So prefixed, we will not go into too much details, but what it covers really is in the context of YANG model is two things. One is ability to set a label index with a route. That is an augmentation in route policy model. Then secondly, it's per route state information related to the prefixed that is received with every route. Egress peer engineering. The configuration and state parameter for EPE, which are related to peer node set, peer adjacency set, and peer set set. Also static and dynamic EPE configuration, and backup policy and associated backup set configuration. And these are all defined by extension to neighbor container in the from the base BGP model. Segment routing policies. In the context of BGP, we had to add few things in the YANG model. One is address family identities corresponding to IPv4 SR policy and IPv6 SR policy. This is for signaling of SR policies via BGP. This is done by adding address family, extending the address family base identity from base BGP model. You have a question?
In interest of time, I'll wait till the end of the talk. Keep going.
Okay, sure. Then the state of BGP signaled SR policy explicit candidate paths. Then on-demand SR policy candidate paths triggered by BGP. And then the overall SR policy state in the context of BGP to support automatic steering. So for SR explicit policies, it's really the routes, the SAFI routes, which are modeled here. And I would like to point out that a lot of the details about the SR policies, such as segment list, etc., we'll be importing those from system SR policy model. But very basic details are added here. For on-demand policies, there are two things. Set of authorized policy colors for which BGP is authorized to trigger the on-demand policies, which are actually instantiated by collaboration with PCE on the head end. And then the list of actual instantiated candidate paths in the context of BGP. So the containers and list are added for this under global BGP mode, again from the base BGP model. For automatic steering, BGP maintains a SR policy state overall regardless of the method of instantiation of the policy. And then when it receives the color exchange community with the route, it binds that route to the SR policy binding SID. So the useful information here in the context of YANG model is showing the state of steering and which policy the route is steering over with each overlay route. So what we did is the suitable address family list entries are extended here. Per route information is added with a new container for automatic steering. And there are leaf refs to the SR policy state. For SRv6, the extensions are of two kinds. One is SRv6 SID allocation mode, and secondly, the state of receive SID and local SIDs in the context of per VPN route. So this is what it covers right now in the 00 version, and it's there are several TBDs, and there's a bit of alignment with base BGP model also, and we have to import the SR policy specific data types from system SR policy model. So that is our next step, to take care of all those and submit the revisions, and then we would like to request a detailed review.
Okay, my
and
3 comments.
Thing from the chair, we need to make up some time, so comments from those at the line. Line is cut after that, and please keep your comments brief. Thank you.
Great, I'll be as quick, please. Please make sure to also work with the RTWG group on the policy and make sure you harmonize with that. Second, please look at CARE's extension draft that was our intended for the BGP model. Perhaps you can harmonize and get a bit more of your space out. Better refactoring means better question. And the last, are you basing this on any other traffic studies outside of Spring? You have use cases in Spring, but do you have non-use cases for this Spring use cases for this thing?
Yes, so for the to your previous points, policy, yes, there are policy related extensions in this, in the context of SR extensions in BGP, and the approach I have taken is to define this in this model instead of base BGP or routing policy model, but it's really augmenting the policy constructs from the policy model. And I think I'm open for suggestions if that is not the right approach. Then I would take a look at the extension, BGP extension model, especially for the BRIV structure. If it becomes available there, then the BRIV structure from here can be removed, and rather the suitable list from BGP extension model can be used. The last comment is, yes, it is in the context of Spring, because this is segment routing related extensions in BGP. But are you saying that this should be?
No, I just talked to the, I may send questions to Grow then. That's all I needed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just answer. So you addressed my first comment. We are trying to align all the policies we do in single document rather than trying to using word policy in BGP document that doesn't mean policy is a horrible thing to do, really. Can we call it something like SR-policy, policy-SR? It's BGP. We know what policies in BGP do. This thing is not policy, right?
No, so this is supposed to cover all the SR extensions in BGP, not just SR policy, all the extensions.
I understand, but as you start argumenting, your wording is becoming really messy, because when we talk about BGP policy, it means something different than this, right?
So BGP policy is BGP route policy, yes.
So if you name it somewhat different, you add something, so we could at least differentiate when it's BGP policy versus SR policy.
Sure.
Would be very useful.
Sure. Okay.
And last thing, we have defined some common types. There's an RFC in routing. You should be using it.
You're talking about the common types in common routing data types model, or common
types?
Yes, this actually uses it. Whatever is available in the RFC,
okay.
It does use to the extent whatever is available there. And I think there is base segment routing model by the Routing Young architecture team. So I plan to use things from there as well. Or
Great.
In fact, would be making requests to add common data types there.
So we are about to go into working group last call on SR Young model. So it would be right time to collaborate and see what should be. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Right. Thank you. Moving right along. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Here I just make the presentation for the BGP analysis expectation for the inter-AS topology retrieval. This is the second time to for this topic. We have update based on the comment from the last meeting. The content of the first I just give the scenario review, and the second is update solution. The third is proposed BGP LS extension. Here I just give the simple review. You know, in our network, we have one backbone and hundreds of main or IDC, which are interconnected with many bundle of links. When we deployment the PCI or SDN controller in our network, we want to collect the topology within each domain and the interconnecting information between different domains. So this is the scenario that we want to solve. We can simplify this now into the graph in the right graph. That is, we use the one controller to get the topology information from the different domain, and the different domain, the underlying domain may run different IGP protocol, or may run the distributed traffic engineer. So the controller can easily get the topology information within each domain via the BGP, but there are some more steps to be finished to get the interconnection topology information between different domains. We just review the kind of solution and find that, for example, the BGP, as I mentioned, just mentioned that it can only get one topology from the one domain and cannot get the inter-S topology information. There are other solutions for the SREP, which SBR can report the inter-S link and node. But if we use this solution, we need every SBR run the BGP protocol. This can limit our limited deployment, because we have several SBR between different domains. Another is the SREST. It introduces some source router identification TLV to transfer, but it is mainly for the ISS. And there are other RFC for define the traffic engineering extension for the inter-S, but the introduced TLV does not report to the controller via the BGP. And then another scenario is the PCI native IP network, and it not mentioned any solution for the inter-S topology too. So here we just give our solution. This solution is updated from the last meeting. We give a solution for the two different scenarios. The first is for the scenario in native IP scenario. The second is for the inter-STE scenario. For the native IP scenario, you know, we need to do two steps to get the inter-S topology information. The first is we should distribute the interconnect links to IS or OSPF protocol, because we will not run IG protocol between the different domains. And after distributing the interconnected link into the different IG protocol, and the distributed information can be carried in SBR or carried in different field in the IG protocol that has been defined in this document. And the second step is we should encode the redistributed router information in the local node descriptor of the prefix NLI. This step has been proposed by AC and Katan after last meeting, because this NLI can have the local node description and can encode such information. The second solution is for the inter-ST scenarios. As I had mentioned, there are two RFC have defined the some TLV to transfer the inter-S link information, but this information does not report to the controller via the BGPLS. So here we just propose extend the BGPLS to transfer this information. So after the PC or SD controller get this information, they can get the topology reconstruction according to the description in this slide. The first is the T scenario. For T scenario, the reconstruction process is simple because the controller has known the S number and IPv4 and IPv6 router ID at the associated T-links. This information has been reported in the BGPLS, and together with the newly reported information that proposed in this draft, the SDN controller can easily reconstruct the inter-S topology information. And for a non-T scenario, it may be more complex to reconstruct the inter-S topology. The first process is, as I described, the PCE collect the topology information respectively in different domains, and each SBR will redistribute the inter-S link into each domain, and we use the local node at associated with the prefix links can carry the originator information of this inter-S link. So PCE can anchor this prefix to correspond SDR. After getting this information, the PCE can reconstruct the inter-S topology when comparing the prefix and their anchors. This process is also same for the inter-S OSPF topology that we have printed in Monday for the topology construction process. It is a similar process. So here we just want to know, is there any new comment for this solution? And if there is no new comment, we want to ask the group for the adoption poll.
Yep, and the chairs have noted the adoption request, and we'll move it to the list. We have 2 minutes for comments. In particular, if you're going to respond to the adoption request and say, I think this is a terrible idea, now would be a good time to come to the mic. Otherwise, thank you. Oh, one question, I guess.
Yeah, just a comment. Ketan Talaulikar, Cisco. I think it would be good to explain the new TLVs being introduced, describe them in the document, and how the procedure for updating and originating them. Further comments, I think we have discussed offline.
Okay.
Jeff, very short comment. As you know, on the inter-S links, the /30 or /31 is usually belongs to one of the address spaces, whether NS or another. It's very, very uncommon to have someone else's address space imported into your IGP. Normally, you wouldn't do this.
No, you know, we just not redistributing the interconnect into the BGP. We just redistribute the interconnect information into the IGP.
That's my point. It's not your space and it doesn't belong in your IGP.
Sorry?
It's not your address space. It doesn't belong in your IGP. Importing someone else's space into your IGP is very uncommon.
We're out of time, guys, but I would encourage you to talk after the meeting. Thank you.
The other, take care of it, don't worry.
Hi, Ketan Talaulikar, Cisco. We're presenting this on behalf of all the co-authors. This is an update to the TLSP distribution, which is a working group document. What this document does is it introduces a new BGPLS NLRI type for T policy advertisement. It covers different types of T policies, RSVPT, segment routing, and also local cross connects. It basically indicates the path, T policy path details and the status. The major updates in version 09 was really aligning the segment routing policy with the architecture document that was adopted by Spring. The descriptors of the SR policy have been updated to align with the SR policy architecture, and the attributes have been updated not just to advertise the segment list, but also other key attributes and status of the SR policy. This really gets some sort of a operational kind of a feedback loop when you talk about signaling via BGP SRT. There are also editorial changes and edits in the document and a bit of section reorganization just for better clarity. There are no changes made to the RSVPT advertisements. So this is the SR policy descriptor, which aligns now with the segment routing SR policy architecture document. There are multiple TLVs introduced. Some of them existed, but they have been updated to signal the state of the SR policy. There is the binding SID TLV, which gives the binding SID that's in use, and also some other details like whether it belongs to SRLB, the status, and so on. Then there is a candidate path state TLV, which actually indicates whether that particular candidate path is active, its validation status, how it was instantiated, whether PC initiated, delegated, and other attributes. We also included SR candidate path name TLV because that's quite useful to reference to SR policy. SR candidate path constraints, which is in use or associated with the candidate path, is also signaled here. There are multiple constraints, including things like algorithm, which is reported now. The segment list TLV has been updated to associate or describe not just segments, but also additional information about how the path was computed, whether it was done dynamically or was it an explicit path, the validation of the SID, weight, algorithm. So all of these have been added newly. Then the segment TLV itself, it has been updated to reflect all the segment types that are defined in the SR policy architecture. So for each type, we have a descriptor. So that's updated in the encodings here. And this has now the SID as well as the validation or resolution status of the SID that can be reported. And finally, there is the metric TLV, which is to indicate the type of metric being used and the value for a particular policy. The procedure section has been updated. Now SR policies can be instantiated via local configuration, PSEP, or BGP SRT, the BGP SR policy draft. So the reporting via this is applicable for all, regardless of what is the source origin, via this specification. And the procedures also describe which attribute TLVs to use and how to advertise the state of the policy. So there are significant changes to the SR policy reporting aspect. So would request the working group to review. It's also been requested in spring, and appreciate any feedback. And would also request for early code point allocation so that we can have implementations for this. I'm not sure if we already have any implementation, but we would like to have code points.
And comment to your presentation. So anytime you advertise something, would be good if you reference how you learn it. And with regards to data modeling, we should consider state reconciliation outside the device itself, because now we are getting operational state that is not on the device itself and need to be able to be compared to configurational state.
Sure, thank you.
Okay. Okay. So the next, this is the BGPLS extension for Flex Algo. It's a very simple, straightforward draft. We have Flex algorithm extensions in IGP. It allows really IGPs to perform constraint-based topology computation for a specific optimization objective or metric type. And each Flex algo has a certain definition. Now that Flex algo definition is applicable in a specific IGP domain. And we have scenarios or use cases where the PCE or a controller learns the IGP topology from multiple domains and needs to compute end-to-end SR policy paths across them. If along with the topology, if the PC or controller also understands or knows what is the definition of the Flex algo in a particular domain, then that allows it to pick the right Flex algo SIDs for forming SR policy with a smaller SID stack across multi-domain. So this extension is really to be able to give that Flex algo definition from a particular IGP domain via BGPLS to the PC or controller. So the Flex algo definition is already advertised by routers, one or more routers in a domain. There is a LSR spec which does this for both OSPF and ISIS. This draft simply proposes to advertise the same as part of node attribute via BGPLS so that the PC or controller can get this information. So there's really the Flex algo definition TLV, which is signaled as an attribute of the node NNRI. And then there are sub TLVs to convey the affinity constraint. This is very much in line with the base IGP spec. So this is the first version, would request working group review and any feedbacks. Okay. So I'll go to the next one. This is BGPLS extensions for SBFD. Now, SBFD session can be set up it's a very lightweight monitoring for a service path between two nodes in the network. Now, for setting up this path, we need to know the SBFD discriminator of the remote node, and this is flooded today via IGPs. Again, there are, similar to the previous case, there are use cases where we need to have the ability to discover the SBFD discriminators across IGP domains. This seamless MPLS, and there is also SR policies spanning multiple domains. So we need to have the ability to learn the SBFD discriminators so that end-to-end SBFD monitoring can be done. So what this draft does is really there are RFCs for signaling the SBFD discriminators as part of node via the IGPs. This draft just simply adds them into as a node attribute and advertises it out via BGPLS. So it's a simple TLV. This is the format of the TLV to be done. Now, the corresponding RFCs, IGP drafts have been RFCs for some time. This document had expired, but it's now updated and refreshed. It also reflects the new use cases and requirements that we have. At this point, I would actually like to ask for a working group adoption for this document.
Okay, noted, and hopefully minuted also. If you'd send us an email to remind us if you haven't already. Thanks. Jeff.
Thank you. This is where I try to give the working group 4 minutes back. So we have a draft on extending FlowSpec to carry interface sets, basically what filters and what interfaces and which direction a FlowSpec rule set covers. Jeff Houston gave us substantial feedback last year on 03. A lot of his comments were basically, this is weird SDN stuff. I'm not sure what you're doing, but the actual features, very straightforward. So we just simply simplified things to the base use case. We don't actually change any of the functionality, between 04 from 03. We do add the comments about the IANA points that had been reserved for us. We have exactly 2 open issues in terms of how we should actually handle the error behavior when the O and I bits are both set to 0. We're going to change the text to say that the route can't become active and that should be treated as withdrawal. The text is silent on what we do about the treatment of the AS number field in there. Nokia's implementation currently ignores this. Its interface is treated basically as wildcard AS group. We will need to have a little bit of discussion, ideally with working group participation, as to what we should do here. Past that point, we'd like to get these last 2 issues cleared out and then resume the last call process.
Any questions or comments? If not, thanks for the time back.
Hello everyone, I'm Cheng Li from Huawei. So my topic today is about path segment in BGP and BGP ARS. So the extension of BGP to advertise SR policy is defined in the draft IDR segment routing T policy, which has been introduced in the previous presentation. So to support the use cases such as performance measurement and path identification and end-to-end 1+1 protection, the path identification is required. But however, in SR pairs, the egress nodes cannot determine the path which the packet come from. So since node label or the last label will remain in the packets, so the egress cannot understand. So for solve this problem, we propose 2 drafts to identify SM path. So the Chung Spring Ampere path segment introduce a new segment to identify an SR path in SR Amperes called path segment. Similarly, we propose an SR-V6 path ID to identify an SR-V6 path in draft Lee Spring passive PM for SR-V6 PM. So for advertising the path ID information within an BGP SR policy, the new extension is required, right? Also, for collecting the path ID information within an SR policy, new extension in BGP ARS is needed as well. So we propose 2 drafts. So the second one is about the structure of path segment or path ID in BGP SR policy. As we all know that the SR policy structure in BGP has been defined in the draft IETF, IDR segment routing TE policy. And since we introduce a POS segment to identify the POS ID, so we include a new POS ID sub-TLV under the segment list TLV. So this is the format of the POS ID TLV. We define several flags to indicate some different scenarios, functions, such as the G flag indicates the global flag when it should be set when the POS segment is global within an SR domain, right? So the E flag is for the egress flag, which indicates this label is allocated by the egress node. So for the current version, we define two POS ID for SR pairs and SRv6 network. So by the way, we also define the SR policy for bidirectional POS. As we know that in SR network, a bidirectional POS can be like represented as binding of two unidirectional SR POSes. So for describe this kind of SR policy, we define two new TLVs. The first one is bidirectional POS sub-TLV, and the second one is reverse segment list sub-TLV. So the second draft is lead IDR BGP errors as a policy POS segment. And in this draft, we specify the way of collecting the configuration and state of SR policies, which carries the POS ID and bidirectional POS information by using the BGP ARS. So the SR policy can be like described by the TE policy state TRV defined in the draft we mentioned before, the T RSP distribution, which is carried in the link state attribute. So rather than define the new TRVs, we use the equivalent sub TRVs, which has been which are defined in the draft IDR as a policy POS segment distribution. Yeah, which is the previous draft I presented. So the next step is any comments and contributions are very welcome. Thank you.
Nope. Any comments, questions? Thank you. Last presenter. Did you do both? Yeah. I didn't think.
Hi everyone, I'm Fenghua Zhao from Huawei. This is a farewell topic, and I fill it in seconds. And happy weekend. Let's go. This is about BPLS extensions for advertising POS MTU. This is a background and problem statement. As we have known, currently MTU is not included in the segment routing protocol. And SR may contain more MPRS labels or SRv6 headers in the forwarding packet header. And this may lead to the packet size is larger than the traditional packets. And without the MTU information, the POS calculation cannot assure the packet size is less than the POS MTU, especially for the controller. So this may lead to ineffective packet fragmentation. And in RFC 6326 has defined a sub-TLV to advertise the link MTU in ICS domain. The type value is 28, and the length is 3. And this new draft tries to define a new TLV to advertise the MTU value through BGP LS. This is the detailed information of the solution. And the format of the sub-TLV is shown as below. And the type field is to be defined. And the length value and the value field is consistent with RFC 6326. And also, whenever there is a change in MTU value, the BPRS should re-advertise the TRV to the controller immediately. Then the controller can calculate the path MTU. Next steps, any comments, welcome, co-authors. Okay.
What exactly do you mean, Jeff? What exactly do you mean by MTU? There are as many MTU definitions as vendor in this. Oh, and MPLS MTU is different than layer 2 MTU is different than IP MTU. What exactly are you going to advertise?
I don't know, you mean there are too many TRV definition in BPRS? Sorry.
Did you understand my question?
There
are no agreement across vendors what MTU really means on the link.
Bad learning, sorry. I will discuss you in mail list.
Okay.
Victor Coursing. Just more like a question. So is this a problem that we perceive will likely exist in SP networks? Because like when I think about the operator networks, the label stacking that typically gets you to a large increase is also fully controlled by that SP, which typically would manage their MTU across their network, and we wouldn't necessarily expose this outside of the domain. So is this something where we have operator input that has shown that this is likely going to actually happen, therefore we feel that the extensions are necessary to deal with this? Was my question not clear? So I understand the problem statement. What I'm saying is this something that we feel is actually going to happen in real life?
Yeah. Sorry.
Perhaps you could address that on the mail list as well.
Okay,
sure,
okay,
I'll re-ask questions.
Sorry. That's okay. Happy weekend.
Okay, well, if there are no further questions or comments, I believe we are done. So thank you, everybody, for staying till the bitter end. I'll remind you that we are planning to schedule an interim to talk about the things we were talking about yesterday. If you have any suggestions for us about when that interim shouldn't be scheduled and all that, you can let us know. If not, watch your email. Thanks, everybody. Have a good trip home. We'll see you when we see you.
Let's